Three engines built the American diesel pickup. They agreed on almost nothing. One was praised for running past 500,000 miles. One made big power, but could grenade a head gasket. One was the smooth, refined newcomer nobody saw coming. Powerstroke, Duramax, and Cummins each had a completely different idea of what a diesel truck should be. And for 40 years, buyers have argued over which one you could trust, which one you could build, and which one would still be running long after the others quit. So which one really won? To understand the fight, you have to remember that not long ago, a diesel in a pickup made no sense to most people. Diesels were for semis, tractors, and ships. They were heavy, loud, slow, and they smoked. If you wanted a work truck in the 1980s, you bought a gas V8, and you accepted that towing anything heavy up a grade would drink fuel and strain the engine to its limit. Nobody thought of a diesel as something you parked in your own driveway. That was about to change, and one company changed it almost by accident. In 1989, Dodge was losing the truck war, and badly. Its Ram was a distant third behind Ford and Chevy, and it needed something no rival had. So Dodge did something strange. It reached past the car world entirely and dropped an industrial engine, a 5.9-liter Cummins inline six built for tractors and farm equipment, straight into the Ram. On paper, the numbers were modest, 160 horsepower, but it made 400 pound-feet of torque down low where a truck actually pulls. It was almost entirely mechanical, with no computer to fail, and it would run past 300,000 miles on nothing but oil changes. It was rough, it was loud, and it was slow by today's standards. It was also nearly impossible to kill. That engine didn't just save Dodge, it invented the whole idea of the diesel pickup. For the first time, a regular person could buy a truck with a big rig heart, and it forced Ford and Chevy to answer or get left behind. Cummins guys have never let anyone forget who did it first. Ford was not going to let that stand. Ford had been putting diesels in its trucks since the early 80s, built by a longtime partner called International, later known as Navistar. But those early engines were slow and forgettable. Then, in the middle of 1994, Navistar handed Ford the engine that would become a legend, the 7.3-liter Powerstroke. It was a turbocharged V8 with a clever oil-driven injection system, forged connecting rods, and 6 head bolts holding down every single cylinder. At launch, it made 210 horsepower and 425 pound-feet, enough to beat the Cummins Ram of the day, and by the end of its run, it was up to 275 horsepower and 525. But the number that mattered was never power, it was miles. The 7.3 would routinely run past 300,000 miles, and plenty crossed 500,000 without the block ever being opened. Navistar built nearly 2 million of them. If the Cummins started the diesel pickup, the 7.3 Powerstroke is the engine that put one in every contractor's driveway in America. That left General Motors on the outside looking in, stuck with an old, dated diesel that couldn't touch neither rival. GM knew it was behind, so it did the smart thing. It went and found help. In 2001, GM teamed up with Isuzu, a company that understood diesels far better than GM did, and together they launched the 6.6-liter Duramax. And it was nothing like the two brutes it was chasing. Where the Cummins and the Powerstroke were mechanical and rough, the Duramax was quiet, smooth, and modern. It used a high-pressure common rail injection system years before Cummins or Ford did. It had aluminum heads, and it was backed by the Allison transmission, the first automatic anyone actually trusted behind a serious diesel. It started at 235 horsepower and quickly climbed past 300, and critics could not believe how refined and quiet it was next to the old-school competition. The latecomer didn't win by being tougher. It won by being better-mannered, and it forced everyone else to get civilized. And that is when the argument really caught fire, because now there were three, and each one stood for a different idea of what mattered. The Cummins was the simple, unkillable inline-six that traced its blood back to a tractor. The Powerstroke was the big American V8 that a whole generation had grown up trusting. The Duramax was the refined, high-tech upstart that made the other two feel old. Truck buyers didn't just pick an engine, they picked a side. The debates ran at job sites, at boat ramps, on internet forums, and at the pull track, and they were never once settled because every side had 1,000,000 miles of proof. And within each brand, there was one engine the faithful worshipped above all the rest. For Cummins, it was the 12-valve, the earliest and simplest 5.9, so overbuilt that people still cut them out of rusted trucks to drop into something newer. For Ford, it was that 7.3. For the Duramax crowd, it was a later version called the LBZ, the last one built before the emissions equipment showed up, prized for how much power it could safely take. Those three engines are the high watermark, the ones truck people still hunt for today because they landed in the narrow window when these diesels were powerful, clean enough to sell, and still simple enough to trust with your livelihood. But every one of these engines has a scar, and this is where the loyalty gets tested. Ford's turn came first, and it came hard. When emissions rules killed the beloved 7.3 in 2003, Navistar replaced it with the 6.0 Powerstroke. On paper, it made more power, 325 horsepower. In the real world, it became infamous. The head bolts stretched and let the head gaskets go. The exhaust gas recirculation coolers cracked and dumped coolant where it didn't belong. Oil coolers clogged. Trucks with barely 100,000 miles racked up repair bills in the many thousands of dollars. Owners filed class action after class action, and Ford and Navistar ended up suing each other over who was to blame. Ford was so burned by it that it eventually threw out the partner it had used for decades and started building its own diesels in-house. That gamble paid off. Ford's own 6.7 Powerstroke, launched in 2011, finally gave the company a diesel it controlled from end to end, and over time it rebuilt the name the 6.0 had nearly destroyed. Cummins and Duramax carried their own wounds. The common rail Duramax was brilliant, but its first version hid its injectors underneath the valve covers, and when those injectors failed, and they did, fuel washed down into the oil and could destroy the engine from the inside, while the repair cost a small fortune in labor just to reach them. It got its own class action and an extended warranty. Cummins, for its part, moved to an electronic injection pump on its late 90s trucks that earned a reputation for quitting without warning and leaving drivers stranded on the shoulder. Nobody escaped clean. Then the thing that had already burned Ford came for all three of them at once. Through the 2000s, emissions rules tightened year after year, and every answer added complexity. Particulate filters, exhaust fluid, more recirculated exhaust choking the intake. A new high-pressure fuel pump called the CP4 that, when it let go, sent metal shavings through the entire fuel system and cost more than $10,000 to put right. The simple, fixable diesel that Cummins and Ford had made famous was gone. In its place came engines that made incredible power, but needed a dealer's laptop to diagnose and a small fortune to keep alive. And here is the strange truth sitting at the center of all of it. Today's diesel pickups are better than anything these three brands built in their prime. A modern one makes double the horsepower and tows loads that would have been impossible 30 years ago. Some now leave the factory with well over 400 horsepower and more than 1,000 pound-feet of torque, numbers that would have sounded like a lie in 1989. By every number on the page, the new ones win. But something got lost along the way. The feeling of an engine that answered your right foot with no computer sitting in between. An engine simple enough to fix in your own driveway with your own two hands. An engine you trusted so completely that you stopped thinking about it and just drove. That is what people are really arguing about when they argue about these three, not horsepower. The feeling. So which one really won? The honest answer is that all three did, and each one won a different part of the fight. Cummins won first. It proved a diesel belonged in a pickup at all, and then it proved that engine could outlast the truck wrapped around it. Powerstroke won the driveway. The 7.3 made the diesel pickup normal, mainstream, and beloved by millions of ordinary owners, and Duramax won the future. It dragged the whole segment into the quiet, refined, common rail world that the other two would spend years chasing. Take any one of them out of the story, and the diesel pickup you know today does not exist. But the only answer that really counts is yours. Which one did you run? Was it the 12-valve Cummins that got your first business off the ground? The 7.3 you swore would never die, and it never did? Or the Duramax that made you a believer the first time you hooked onto a heavy load and it just pulled? Whatever it was, that engine is part of the story of your working life. If you've got that story, put it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and watch the next video above.